Welcome, everyone. As Connie said, I'm the Chair Emeritus, and I have the honor tonight of introducing our guests, primarily because the new chair, the new vice chair, are on vacation, and our four illustrious legislators, Senator Joe Rafferty, Senator Henry Ingerson, Representative Tracy Geer, Representative Dan Sayre, are all in Augusta doing the hard work to end the legislative session, and also they worked to approve the governor's budget last week, so they're hard at work. So in their place, I am honored to have the privilege of introducing our governor. For those of you who are familiar with working hard for political activities, whether it's women's rights, civil rights, and all of the things we've done in our lives, we welcome this strong, committed leader. Janet Mills was Maine's first female Attorney General. She was the first woman governor of Maine. She led us through the pandemic. She expanded Medicare for 90,000 Mainers. She continued the state share of education funding, continuing at 55%. She increased revenue sharing from 2% under, you remember him, Paul LePage, to 5% now. And she helped make Maine a national leader in protecting farmers, food, and water from PFAS contamination. A tough and resolute fighter for Maine who has stood up against you-know-who, telling him what? That's right. She's been an amazing governor, and it's my honor to introduce our governor, Janet Mills.
Thank you. Thank you. Ooh. Thank you very much. I got to take her on the road with me. You're too kind. It's good to be here. And yes, your good Democratic legislators are hard at work in Augusta. I was pleased just the other day to sign a supplemental budget into law. And let me tell you a little bit about that because I think it indicates our priorities as a Democratic Party and my own priorities as your governor. Listen, we passed a budget that includes more money for child care stipends because we know that it's hard to find child care in this state still, although we've put about $145 million behind child care in the last couple of years. Never enough. We need to make sure we educate early childhood educators, train them up, and make sure they are well paid when they go to work. We've been doing that. We've increased the number of child care slots by over 600 in the last couple of years, increase. We put money into health care, put a reserve account into play in this budget for health care because we know that cuts are coming. We can never backfill enough on the state as a state alone, but we've got some reserves. And general purpose aid to education. We also kind of backfilled that some too because we know it's getting higher and higher every year. And as you know, I am the first governor to have finally fully funded the state's share for education, the first one in the state of Maine. So I'm proud of that too. And we're keeping our commitment to the schools and to our children so that they get a quality education whatever zip code they may live in. Also, we've increased teacher pay. The budget includes a measure to increase teacher pay, minimum teacher pay to $50,000. When I took office, it was $30,000. Then now we put it up to $40,000. Now it's going to be $50,000. So proud of that too. And property tax relief. We actually enacted a 2% surcharge on incomes of over $1 million, personal income over $1 million. And I thought that was a fair thing to do in view of what the Congress of the United States and this Trump administration, oops, I said the word, did last year in passing the big bad bill, which included massive tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires and cuts to health care and food assistance at the same time. It's a cruel, cruel measure. And Susan Collins just enabled that whole thing by advancing the bill that the Republicans then passed. So we have set aside some money, and we've taxed millionaires in Maine. From only those incomes over $1 million get the 2% surcharge, but it's to be poured back into our budget to pay for some more property tax relief and child care and health care. And we advanced monies for veteran services as well. So all that's in the budget that I just was pleased to sign just the other day. But we've been working hand in glove with the Democratic leadership in Augusta to do all these things, knowing that there's only so much a state can do, given the trauma and the dramatic stuff that's going on in DC and across this world because of the Trump administration. So I gave it a lot of thought last summer when people said, "Oh, you should run for U.S. Senate." I said, "Well, you know, so it's going to be hard work." And I thought, what if I do this thing? What if I give it my all and I unseat Susan Collins, but I go down there and I'm in the minority in the United States Senate? So I asked some friends of mine. I asked one guy who's a pretty prominent, nonpartisan pundit, and I said, is it worth it? And I said, what would I have done for my state if that happens? And he said, if you bring him down one vote in the Senate, you put a nail in his shoe. You bring him down 2 votes, you put 2 nails in his shoe. And you've taken out a voice, Susan Collins, who is merely an enabler of Trump's agenda. Eliminating that voice is an important thing to do too. And then he said, and besides, Janet, it's not just about your state alone, it's about your country. And I began to think, he's absolutely right. Because I am running for the United States Senate because I really believe if we don't do everything we can to save our country in the next 2 years or less, we're going to lose our country. We absolutely are. This man is a disaster. He's a creator of chaos and devastation. He's taken a sledgehammer not just to the White House, but to our economy with these whipsawing tariffs and many other measures with a lot of pay-for-play, corrupt economic measures. And he's taken a sledgehammer to our democracy and to our Constitution. I saw him up front and personal, up front and close, a little over a year ago. And when he turned on me at the National Governors Association meeting at the White House and said, "You going to follow my executive order?" And I said, "I'm going to follow state and federal law." He said, "Well, you better follow my executive order because you won't get any federal money. You'll lose all your federal money." And I said, "I'm going to follow state and federal law. I happen to know what state law is in Maine. I signed the bill. And I know what federal law is under Title IX." And I said, "I'm going to follow state and federal law." And he said, "Well, we are the federal law." And that was a jaw-dropping moment for me. I just thought, who says this stuff? King Louis XIV, hundreds of years ago? Who even thinks that way? And I thought, man, this is insane. And that's when I said, well, I'll see you in court. I think like any Maine country lawyer would say, I'll see you in court. And he said, fine. So a few weeks later, he tried to take away all of our federal funding for the school lunch program. What's that got to do with anything? We went to court immediately with a very able Attorney General, Aaron Frey. Within a week, we had a temporary restraining order against the federal government, and they stood down. So we took them to court, saw them in court, and we won. My father always told me, he was a World War II veteran, he was at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the worst naval battle in history. He always said, Janet, you got to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. That was a rule. And he said, you always got to stand up to a bully, because if you don't, they just never quit. And so I'm not afraid of bullies. You know my experience with Paul LePage. 6 years of fighting him. First fight we had was over health care. He tried to take away health care from young adults, and I said, no, you can't. We went to court, and I won. And then, went from there on. And then over naloxone, the life-saving drug to save people who have overdosed. And he prevented that from happening, even after the legislature said, no, get the naloxone out there. We don't want people dying. I put naloxone in the trunk of my car. I bought some, a room full of it, with the settlement monies from suing pharmaceutical companies. Oh, I thought that was poetic. And I distributed it all around the state to fire departments and police stations because we needed it. And now in the last 7 years, we've had a good opioid response. We've had Narcan everywhere. And we've had measures to turn people's lives around when they've gotten addicted. We've done things creatively in our state. But I thought, when I heard that business about, well, I am the law, any fifth grade civics student knows that the president doesn't make the laws. The president cannot amend a law, repeal a law, or create a law by executive order or tweet or press release. The Congress makes the laws. Only Congress can amend or repeal a law, not the president. We have 3 branches of government, not 1. And I thought, he's never read the Constitution. And I happen to have read it a few times. I've argued more than 100 cases in the Maine Supreme Judicial Court over a variety of things. And I thought, I don't think that the United States Constitution is merely a suggestion box. I believe it is the law. I think the First Amendment means not only do I and you all have a right to speak up and speak out, but it means we have a right to gain information too from sources other than network TV stations that are owned by corporate entities who are loyal only to the president. We have that right too. And I happen to think that due process means that you have a right not to be dragged off the street or out of your car, out of your home, without a warrant based on probable cause. Not like what we saw in Portland and Lewiston. And I happen to believe that equal protection under the law means that we are all treated equally under the law, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, place of birth, etc. I have fought for these things all my life. I have fought for women's rights. I've fought for LGBTQ rights. Oh, is that my mother? I have fought for equality in the workplace, equality for seniors, and rights for children too. And so I thought to myself, I got to think about doing this thing because I can take her out. If you're tired of the Congress not standing up to President Trump, then you have to change who's in the Congress. And that's why I decided I'm going to take it on and remove Susan Collins. Because Susan is, very concerned. They have 5 levels of concern for her in the U.S. Senate, I heard. She's concerned, but she's never courageous. Even when poor Alex Preddy was dying on the streets of Minneapolis, shot in the back how many times? Murdered on video. Susan Collins said, "This is very concerning." Concerning! It was a murder before our very eyes by federal agents who have yet to be punished or held accountable or controlled in any measure. That's not right. So we've got to stand up to this administration. We've got to move on and stand up to what he's done and what he continues to do. Every day it gets scarier and scarier. And it's not just about him, it's about Susan Collins. Voting with him 94% of the time. Voting for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a science denier. And now we have cases of measles here in Maine and other states, which we shouldn't have to have, because he's a science denier and a vaccine denier. And now we're coordinating with Northeast states together so we can preserve our public health infrastructure. She voted for Linda McMahon, the wrestling queen, who thinks that AI is a steak sauce. You know, she was on a panel when she got nominated. She actually said, well, I think every child from kindergarten on up ought to have A1. I go, it doesn't go on your hamburgers. AI. She voted for, as we know, Brett Kavanaugh. So 6 years ago, we had a good candidate against Susan Collins. We had Sarah Gideon, worked very, very hard. We had the Kavanaugh decision, but we did not then have the Dobbs. We had the Kavanaugh vote. We didn't have the Dobbs decision. That came 2 years later. Now we know how that vote, that pivotal vote she cast, has wreaked havoc on women and girls across this country. Now, because of that vote, about a third of all women in the United States lack reproductive health care. You can't even get life-saving health care on the doorsteps of an emergency room in many states after a miscarriage. And you don't even hear about that anymore, but it's a daily tragedy because of Susan Collins' vote for Brett Kavanaugh. And so in the meantime, we have tried to recoup, we have tried to regroup and get as many things passed at the state of Maine level to preserve a woman's right to reproductive health care, expanding the scope of practice, making sure people can have mifepristone and providing an immunity for providers in Maine who treat people out of state and vice versa. So, you know, a shield law and things like that. We've gone as far as we can on the state level. But now we need to do things at the federal level. I've worked my tail off on climate change, climate action the last 7 years and beyond as Attorney General. Incorporating and codifying goals about greenhouse gas emissions reductions and clean energy resources and battery storage and all these things that we've got to do, and onshore wind, offshore wind, and solar. But the Congress of the United States has repealed the tax credits that help make that happen. And so it is time to go to Congress, to the United States Senate, to make sure that they understand climate change is real, and I'm going to fight it. Because you have to at the federal level. We have to teach people that it's our planet at stake. When it comes to health care, you know, I fought Paul LePage on health care for 6 years, and then on day one of my administration, I expanded health care, Medicaid, to about 100,000 people, and now several 100,000 people have had access to affordable care because of that. And I'm proud of that. So while Susan Collins enables the Trump administration to take away health care and take away millions and millions of dollars for Medicaid and food assistance to states like Maine, I have fought hard to make sure people have what they can have, health care in Maine, expanding Medicaid to to dental care and the like, making sure every child is covered by health care, and making sure that you're not punished for a pre-existing condition. We put that in law, and that every kid young person, up to age 26 can stay on their parents' health insurance. Health care is a human right. I have always believed in that. It is not a new idea to me. I'll tell you why I believed in this so strongly. I ran for governor 8 years ago in good part because my husband had a stroke a few years back. A stroke that ultimately took his life. And for those 11 months, I had to fight like hell. Fight tooth and nail with an insurance company that kept trying to deny his care. And I found out personally what that's like. In the worst days of your life, dealing with a spouse who's ailing and dying, trying to get basic health care was horrible. Fighting over co-pays and deductibles and the high cost of prescription drugs and denial after denial. I took appeals. Seven times they denied his care. 7 times I appealed and I won. But that's me. I thought about, what about the tens of thousands of families across Maine who don't have a Janet Mills advocating for them at their bedside? And that's who I think about every day. When I think about going to the United States Senate, I think about universal health care, how extraordinarily important it is. I don't want people to go through what I went through with my husband. You know, having to deal with the 5 stepdaughters. I married a widower with 5 daughters. I told you that, right? You know that. Ages 4 to 16 when we met. Hey, look, I brought up 5 girls through their teenage years. If I can do that, I can do this goddamn Senate race, right? But, you know, having the middleman, having the insurance companies dictate everything, and they're not in the business of providing care or compensation or compassion. They're in the business of denying. That's what we're stuck with in this nation. Only in this nation. We spend the most money on health care or some form of health care than any other wealthy nation. But we have the worst outcomes of any other wealthy nation. That's not right. America can do big things. We did the Social Security Act in 1935. I wasn't there, but. And they did the interstate transportation system, the highway system in the 1950s under Eisenhower. We did the Civil Rights Act. We did great things. We did Medicare in '64. They put a man on the moon, and now a rocket around the moon, and all the way back. We can do health care. We've done big things, and this is a big thing that needs to be done, pure and simple. Even the ACA, as controversial as it is and has been for some reason among Republicans, except for John McCain, God bless him, even that is only a Band-Aid on the whole problem of health care, which needs major surgery. It just does. I read about what they do in Belgium and Ireland and Australia and Norway and other countries. Different sources of wealth, but they get stuff done, they have better outcomes, and they don't waste everybody's money and time on unnecessary procedures and whatnot. So we got to do health care. We got to do climate change. We got to do education at the federal level. I've done all these things at the state level as much as I can, and I'm not going to sit idly by and watch the Senate and the United States Congress and Susan Collins tear apart all of our work and not move forward. So finally, last fall, I thought about something. I got an award called the Robert F. Kennedy Senior Human Rights Award, which I was very proud to receive. And I thought about something he said, if I get it right. He said, it is more comfortable to sit in the easy approval of friends and of neighbors than to risk the friction and the controversy that comes with public affairs. And I said to myself, I can't sit back and do nothing. I got to do this thing. I'm going to take her on, and I'm going to unseat her. I'm going to turn the Senate blue, and I am going to change the course of history in this country. That's why I'm running for the Senate. So, I want to hear from you. I want to take any questions, concerns, comments, and whatnot. And we got a roving mic and a.
Hi. Thank you so much for your service to this state, and thank you for standing up to Trump. It means everything to those of us who watched you do it. I saw what you mouthed actually before you said "see you in court," which I won't say here, but I was like, yes. My question is that the other candidate that's running in the primary has gotten a lot of press, saying a lot of stuff. Seems to be, to me, that campaign is a lot of vibes, but I haven't heard a ton of like substantial proposals. I just want someone who can win, that can beat her. And I just wondered how you plan to engage the youth vote, because a lot of those younger people tend to be tracking towards him. And
Yeah. Good question, thank you. Oh, I just saw those heat pumps here. I'm so glad. I'm sorry. Every time I see a heat pump, I think, we installed 200,000 of them in the state of Maine, part of our fight against climate change. But listen, I appreciate that. And, a lot of press and a lot of imagery and stuff going on. And, I have 5 grandchildren now, and 3 of them are young men in their 20s, early, mid-20s, and all in Maine. 2 of them have gotten engaged and 1 got married, and they want to stay here in Maine. They want to buy a house. It's out of their range. They both have good jobs, but they're not going to be able to buy a house in Maine anytime soon. I know that. And I think about them every day, and I think I see the world sometimes through their eyes, and which is why, and I have 2 little granddaughters who are just cute as a button, but it's partly why I've worked with the Democrats in the legislature to increase funds for child care, to put over $300 million behind housing and another 70-something million dollars in this new budget behind housing. It's partly why we increased the taxes, real estate transfer taxes last year for homes sold of over $1 million. A little increase in just that amount, and roll that into first-time home buyers programs and housing, affordable housing. We've done a lot in housing, but never enough. But the Congress needs to expand the affordable housing tax credit. They need to expand the housing rehabilitation tax credit, which has been very valuable to us. Those of us who love the downtowns of towns across Maine, who want to preserve those old school buildings and other buildings that can be remodeled and rehabilitated into housing, which we've been doing, a lot of that. It's also why we've enacted the most progressive student loan tax credit in the country. We don't talk about it enough. We got to rename it somehow. That'd help. But if you're a young person and you've got student debt, wherever you went to school, whatever you majored in, you're paying taxes in Maine, you live and pay income taxes in Maine, you get $2,500 back on your taxes, a tax credit every year for paying your student loan. It's pretty darn good. It doesn't pay off your whole, it's not a forgiveness thing. You pay the loan and you get a tax credit. I think it's very good. Those kinds of things we've been doing. Now, you get into the weeds because you have to get into the weeds to get stuff done, and the child care tax credits and the child care programs I just mentioned to you before. Those things I see as very valuable to young people in Maine, and I'm going to be talking a lot more about them. I don't just talk the talk, I walk the walk. It's easy to talk about change. It's easy to talk about the miserable things going on and what you'd like to, how you dislike this and dislike that. A lot harder to get stuff done. People like to talk change. Some people talk about change. Some people cause change. I'm one who causes change and gets stuff done. So as you know, I'm running for 1 term. 1 term only because I want to get there and get stuff done on day 1. I don't want to be beholden to anybody. I don't want to be raising money the next day, dialing for dollars for 6 years, or running for re-election when I'm Bernie Sanders' age. I have the energy, the commitment, and the ability to do this, and I really want to do it. I believe I can beat Susan Collins because of 3 things. Not that you asked that question exactly, but because of 3 things. 1, we've always put good people up against Susan Collins. We've never beat her because the people we've put up against her have been untested, all right? Sarah Gideon, good person. She won her House election, like 4,000 votes. Never run statewide. I've run statewide twice. I had a 7-way primary first for governor, and then a 4-way general election, which I won by 7.7 points, I believe. And then I ran for re-election. And I took on the inimitable former two-term Republican Governor Paul LePage. And I beat him by 13 points. I beat him in his hometown of Lewiston. I beat him in the town where he was mayor of Waterville. I beat him in the town where he rented a house for 3 months to establish residency. He still hasn't conceded. 4 years ago, he actually said to a reporter, "I'm never conceding that election. That was stolen from me." Is there an echo? He said, it was all those illegals. I'm thinking, Paula, you idiot, 89,610 illegals. Somebody in Maine would have noticed. That was the vote spread. So I've won statewide. I know how to do this. And they have thrown the kitchen sink at me. Trust me, they have. And I've survived and I've won. Not much else they can throw at you. So, and secondly, Susan Collins always runs a hyper-local campaign. All this stuff she's doing, traveling around the world and being the blah, 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 super chair of Appropriations Committee. Great. But she brings home the bacon, and she'll talk about bringing home the bacon incessantly. You know, I gave money for a new fire station here or there, and this and that and the other thing. Okay, but I can go toe-to-toe with her like nobody else has ever been able to do because I've delivered progress for Maine people, too. She did this grant for rural health. Well, I expanded healthcare to 100,000 people on day one. And small business stipends for health insurance, and this and that and the other thing. We brought down the uninsured rate to 5%, the biggest drop of any state in the country. Proud of that. Well, she's in Washington helping Trump take away funds for health care. She can talk about housing. I can talk about housing. She can talk about this and that. I can talk about climate change because she's done nothing on that. Nothing. Just look at the oil and gas industry and how they rule Washington, D.C. right now. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, I'm the only person in this campaign who's actually stood up to Trump. And I'll do it again in the United States Senate. So, yes, ma'am.
Governor Bill, first, thank you for your service and everything you've done for me. It is very much appreciated. Secondly, in your Senate seat, how would you address the issues facing older adults in our state and state and throughout the country for that matter?
Older adults.
Good point.
Well, Social Security and Medicare need some fixes. I think we do need to increase the cap beyond which people now no longer pay into Social Security over that cap. Things like that. We need to get together and fix the financial issues facing Social Security and Medicare and make the COLAs real COLAs, frankly, not just sort of minutia. I think that housing is a big issue. You know, my first week in office, I signed the senior housing bond that Paul LePage had sat on for 4 years because he didn't like the sponsor. It was, Mark Eves' bill, and he didn't like Mark Eves. It was stupid. So we've been doing a lot on housing, and senior housing including. Section 8 and other federal programs could be expanded to make sure that people have housing. And I think Meals on Wheels programs, things of that sort, obviously I'm a supporter of that. The tax code could be more amenable to seniors. In Maine, we have now exempted the first $48,000 of retirement income, retirement pension plans from taxation. Pretty good. The federal government doesn't do that. That's why they created that $600 thing. So there are a lot of things you can do about seniors, for seniors, but healthcare is a huge one for everybody. I worry a lot about the people who are losing health care right now because the ACA tax credits were not renewed. And a lot of those people are in the gap between work life ending at 50, 55 and getting Medicare at 65 or whatever bracket you fall into. A lot of people in that range were using the stipends to pay for health insurance, and now it's gone. Health insurance premiums in Maine, elsewhere in Maine, both have doubled, tripled, quadrupled. And seniors, let's say 60, 65-year-olds, are losing health insurance because of the ACA not being renewed. So it's a big gap, and it affects a lot of people. Seniors in particular, I think, people over 60, let's say. And Medicare itself Half of people on Medicare have to pay for Medigap, which is generally United Healthcare, which is a profit-making institution. Doesn't mind raking in a lot of profits off of people who have Medicare but need Medigap as well. Half of them. So those kinds of things need to be reformed. Housing, healthcare, yeah. Another thing we've done in Maine, back to, well, seniors and youth, we've expanded broadband all across the state of Maine. As soon as I say that, somebody's going to raise their hands. I don't have it in my house, you know. But we have done a lot to expand broadband all across the state. And that is one reason young families are moving here and people are working remotely, working from home. And I'm proud of that. And it's helped a lot of seniors as well. Telehealth, teleeducation, teleworking is expanding in Maine. You had your, yes.
I live in Kennebunks, West Oklahoma, I live in Kennebunks. For 10 years, I managed the federal lobbying office for DKA and came back here in 2017. Since then, we spent a lot of time being angry in DC. I think your opponent is spending a lot of time being angry. He makes some good points, but he's angry a lot. You can't get anything done in DC, especially in the Senate, without getting somebody from the other side to come to your side. And you don't get them to come to your side by telling them they're stupid because they voted for Trump. So I'm wondering, what is your approach to some of your Republican colleagues, Lisa McCaskey, or other people like that, in the Senate, to try to get them on board with some of the ideas that you have? Thank you for your comment.
Thanks, Wes. Good to see you again. We've been a couple of national conventions together, I think. We won't go back, we won't say what years. It's a good question. And I think that you have to remain friends with the other side. I think if the Democrats take the Senate, they will want to be our friends. Okay? That's one point. When President Biden was in town a couple of years ago, when he was president, he came to Auburn, and I had me get in the car with him, go to do an event, and he was telling a story about Strom Thurmond. He said, you know, people aren't as friendly with the other side as they used to be. When he first went to the United States Senate, President Biden said, Strom Thurmond was his worst enemy, you know, on paper. They disagreed on everything, but they stuck with it. They remained friends. And Thurmond was like 100 years old when he died, still in the Senate. So I'm running for one term. Did I say that? Count on it. But Thurmond remained friends with Joe Biden. And he said, time went on. Initially, Thurmond would vote against the Voting Rights Act. And he would vote against judges that Biden liked and proposed. And then time went on, he started voting for some of the judges that Biden would persuade him were good people. And he voted to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. Surprise! When Thurmond was on his deathbed a few years back, his wife called then Senator Joe Biden and said, Strom would like you to give the eulogy at his funeral. The president said to me, I gave a eulogy to about 30,000 people for a man who was my arch opponent in every way, but a friend. You know, it can happen again. I think the atmosphere is a bit poisonous right now for both sides, and it isn't helped that we have this war, that we have these crazy memes and cartoons that the president keeps putting out there to distract everybody. It doesn't help that you have the Epstein files in the background, still waiting to be disgorged. But, you know, I know how to get stuff done, and I know how to make friends across the aisle. I represented Farmington and industry in the legislature. It's not exactly a hotbed of progressivism. And I won 4 times. As Attorney General, as a governor, I've done a lot across the aisle, whether it was budgets, taxes, education, etc. Oh, thank you.
Across the aisle.
Across the aisle. She's cute. Yes.
So I also wanted to just say how much I admire you and appreciate everything you've done in your career for our state and its people. And I wanted to ask just kind of a philosophical strategy question, which is, some suggest that Democrats need to fight fire with fire, and that to appeal to certain segments of the electorate, we need to appeal to fear and class resentments. So as you travel around the state, how do you respond to those people who argue that that's what Democrats need to do to win?
It's not my style. I think there's enough to be afraid of out there every day. Look, I get my news when I wake up in the morning, I read, or even when I haven't woken up in the morning, I'm reading Heather Cox Richardson online, who's a good friend, good person. And then I go to bed watching Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel both. I'm going back and forth. I met Stephen Colbert at a function in New York a few months ago, and he said, there's fear out there. There's so much fear every day, and how do you deal with it? You know, get an ulcer? What do you do with fear? He said, I turn to comedy because I know that you can't laugh and be afraid at the same time. Isn't that interesting? I think it's true. You have to laugh. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? No, I don't even want to ask that because there's so many things. Oh, no. But you know, and that's somewhat how you make friends across the aisle, too. You have coffee and you joke with them. And you find out about their families. Remember when people used to live in Washington, D.C.? When they were elected, they would bring their families there, and they don't do that anymore. So there's not that much networking, as it were, as there used to be. I think they got along a lot better back then than they do now. But now there's a sort of an atmosphere of intimidation behind all of that, something that I would hope to broker, to break through. So fear, I don't think you should fight fear with fear. I think you should fight fear with common sense and compassion and commitment. Just moving forward. I've had tough times in my life. You know, crap happens, but you move forward. You keep fighting. You know, I keep thinking about people. When I was a prosecutor, people would demonize certain people. Well, he did a lot of these crimes. And you go, you can't demonize the person. You demonize the events and the acts without throwing away that person's soul. Find something, some kind of common ground. We did this in the Emerge program. I taught some of the Emerge classes for about 15 years. And how to do doors, which is, I think, fun. I've done thousands of them. And it's the most intimidating thing you do as a candidate. Walk up to a door, you don't know who the heck is behind that door. But whatever you do, you're not going to go, hey, I'm here to talk to you about politics or about taxes or about it. No. Who are you? Do you have kids? Do they go to school? Find some common ground first and then find out what's on their minds. I think you have to do that in life in general. Otherwise, you'll be very, very lonely and not very productive. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Governor Mills. Thank you for being with us tonight. As a United States Senator, you will be responsible in part for ensuring American compliance with international law. As a signatory to the 1948 Genocide Convention, the United States is obligated to take affirmative action to prevent, suppress, and punish acts of genocide. The specific designation of genocide is critical as it carries with it legally binding obligations which cannot be sidestepped by refusing to assess whether or not genocide is taking place. Today, the state of Israel stands accused of genocide.
Is that what you're reading from? I'm sorry.
I wrote my question. It's an important one to me, so I wanted to
What is the gist of your question? Maybe I should ask that.
The gist of the question is, do you believe that Israel has committed genocide?
I don't use that word. I use that word in terms of like what happened in what's happening right now in certain sub-Saharan countries, for instance. There's a lot of genocide going on. I think what happened in Gaza is a terrible insult to humanity, that it was horrible to bomb medical facilities and schools and starve children, that we need to have a long-term ceasefire, that we need to make sure that humanitarian aid is provided and continued and not interrupted. I believe that the Palestinian people deserve a fair and safe, secure place to live, and I believe that the Israeli people deserve the same. I don't like what Netanyahu has been doing, but I know that a lot of Israeli people feel the same way. So whatever you want to call it, it's a horrible situation, what happened in Gaza. I'm glad there's some pause to it. I hope it is a permanent pause and that we can recoup some peace, so recreate some peaceful coexistence between the communities. They all deserve that. Hey, Tom.
The New England governors met recently to talk about energy policy, and one of the things they decided to promote is nuclear energy. What is your feeling about nuclear energy and anything else that came out of that meeting with the government?
Yeah, they met, it was a breakfast meeting, it was very short, but you know, we have a couple of nuclear power plants left, Seabrook and Millstone in Connecticut. So Ned Lamont is always bringing up nuclear energy because he wants to keep his power plant. And that is a significant source of electricity for Maine still. It is a significant thing we rely on still, nuclear power from those two states. What the discussion was about was small nuclear modules, which really hasn't, it's not near development yet, not near completion. And, you know, we said, well, we're open to looking at it, listening to people and finding out what can be done. We didn't sign off on a thing saying we're all going to go nuclear. but we agreed to keep an open mind about some innovative small nuclear modules if they ever make it, if they ever get completed. You know, it's far from being developed, frankly. New Brunswick is very interested in that as well. But it was just a statement of, yeah, let's look at this. What else? Anything else? There's got to be something else. Yes, yes.
Thank you for your service and all that you've been informing us of tonight. I'm particularly interested and impressed by your commitment to education. And that's what my question is related to. With all the funding that's been cut, and with this person who's running the education department, and all of the use of the acronyms DEI,
Yeah.
people forget there's a fourth letter, accessibility, DEIA.
Yeah.
So with the funds going away for DEI, you're also taking away funds for students who need support services. So I'm asking what you're feeling just about that in terms of, as a senator, what will you do to help restore some of these funds, particularly for students who, if given the proper supports, can thrive?
Yeah. And you're talking about special ed and other support systems. And I've become a big fan of the BAR system, which has improved a lot of student grades in schools across the state when we sent in the BAR system, BAR principles, and you spend a lot more time with teachers talking about individual students as a sort of a collective discussion, that kind of thing. But I think the federal government should bear a lot more responsibility for supportive services and for special ed in particular, because it's from the IDEA, it's a federal law. They should chip in. It's one of the biggest cost drivers of our education system, our public education system, and I don't fault anybody for that. We should give all, you know, every aspect of care that people need to every student to make them a better student and a better person, and have a more fulfilling life. But I think that the federal government has a greater responsibility in that particular area. And I forgot to mention the budget, crying out loud, free community college, we made it permanent. Duh, yeah. That has been not apropos your question really, but education. You know, they always, you know how they messed up with the Pell Grants this last year too? Not messed, they deliberately cut them so that basically only very rich people can go on to graduate schools in medicine, even nursing and things like that. And that's not right. That's not what the Pell Grants were meant for. But no, the free community college, 23,000 people have taken advantage of it so far and more to graduate soon, and I'm really proud of that. The federal government can do the same. They can spend more money, put out more funds for higher eds. And instead, they've been cutting research grants that are so vital to our health, to our science, to marine resources, all these things they're cutting. And I want to reverse that, obviously. But again, special ed and supportive services, the federal government has a greater role to play and should be playing financially. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes?
Governor Mills, thank you for coming. I wonder if you could just say a few words about how your experience will allow you to hit the ground running when you get to Washington, instead of taking months just to learn where the bathrooms are.
That's a softball. Thank you. Listen, you know, I am a lawyer. I can't help it, but I'm a lawyer, and I've written a lot of legislation, and I've amended a lot of bills, and I've done, I think, 13 budgets now in the last 7 years. Plus, I was on appropriations in the legislature for 4 years, and on Judiciary Committee for 4 years, and on Criminal Justice Committee for a year, and I've practiced law, blah, blah, blah. But you don't have to be a lawyer to be in the United States Senate, and I don't mean to suggest that at all. But I think I have the skills to hit the ground running and not be held back with fundraising duties and campaigning duties, gearing up for re-election at point zero. I think I have the skills I know the issues. I know what federal law says in so many respects, and I know what state law says, and I know what the burdens on the state have been, and how the federal government can help us better, and how it should help us better. And I think the first thing I will ask anybody in the United States Senate is, help me help Maine people. Help us uplift the life of every Maine person, whether it's universal health care, better funds and access to education, broadband, jobs, better paying jobs, dealing with AI so that it doesn't cut out jobs or doesn't stifle work. Those kinds of things we have to work on. But I know how to have my voice heard. Put it that way. Some people say, well, you'll be a freshman. I go, in name only. Believe me. Thank you. Thank you.
Can you stay around for a few minutes?
Sure.